Hi, I'm Gary Young.
And I'm Carys and this is Over the Top, Under the Radar.
We caught up with independent MP and former leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn.
This conversation with Jeremy was recorded at the end of July, before the vote on the child benefit cap. Enjoy.
Jeremy, first of all, congratulations on your election. Was your victory a surprise?
It was very nerve-wracking because standing as an independent, you don't really know what the outcome's going to be. And a lot of people right up to polling day were still confused between me being an independent and a Labour candidate. But all the door-knocking, canvassing returns we got showed us getting actually exactly what the result was. So we went to the result hopeful, but never overconfident. I was delighted when I saw the votes piling up about halfway through the count. And
was it a little bit bittersweet? Because obviously you've been a Labour MP for decades now.
Bittersweet, it's not quite the words I'd use. I would say we're proud of the result we achieved and proud of the dignity that we used in the campaign to win it. It wasn't 4 weeks of attacking the Labour Party or attacking the Labour candidate. It was 4 weeks of putting forward positive views and hopeful views and saying to people that we would do politics differently after the election, including at least monthly popular assembly in which I'll report on what I'm doing. And we will also give space to other campaigns. So we're starting off the first meeting in September with housing as the theme to it because of the huge problems of homelessness, overpriced private sector accommodation, overcrowding, which leads to all kinds of problems and is indeed leading to depopulation of my community, with school rolls dramatically falling in a number of places. Housing is absolutely the key to community cohesion. And so we're working on that for the first thing. I've had some years of preparation for this position because I was suspended in 2020, which is, 3.5, nearly 4 years ago. And we'd been thinking about it for a long time. And when they finally said I was not allowed to even have my name considered to be a potential candidate, the local pressure from many people was, you've got to stand as an independent to give us a voice. And so I decided to do it. But it's also about giving a different kind of voice to people as to what they can achieve. And I pointed out during the campaign all the things that have been achieved in our community over all the years I've been here and before that have been because of popular action. That's why we have some of the parks we do, why we have community centres and many other things that we've achieved, including saving the local hospital. So it's about empowering people.
What would you say, Jeremy, are the lessons from your victory, both for Labour and for the left?
Well, the lessons for Labour are that they approached this campaign nationally with a degree of arrogance that surpassed even the height of the Blair years, when Peter Mandelson used to rather loftily say that poor working class voters had nowhere else to go but Labour, so therefore we didn't have to do anything for them. And this campaign, the economic offer was broadly similar between the two major parties. This country is beset by falling living standards for working class communities, huge issues of health and education needs, and huge levels of inequality. Yet the fundamental economic offer was that we're going to carry on more or less the same. And business was mentioned, I think, 60 times in the Labour manifesto, equality once. Well, that is not a good basis to start it. And so I think that was the first problem. Secondly was the deep anger with Labour over the Gaza ceasefire vote, which affected a lot of people, some communities more than others, but it did affect a great many people. And the Labour vote was actually less in numbers than at least the last two general elections, and in percentage terms only went up eventually 1.5% on 2019. And so there's something really strange that I'm accused of being a vote loser in 17 and 19. And the current leadership got less votes nationally than the party did under my leadership. I think they need to reflect on this. They've got this huge parliamentary majority, but it's not built on huge popularity. It's much more built on deep unpopularity of the Conservative government and the loss of Tory votes to reform, which got, I think, nearly 4 million in the end. And so if you add up the Reform and Tory votes, you get to a pretty frightening prospect of a very large block of people that buy into the kind of nasty rhetoric that Farage was putting forward and some of the Tories were putting forward. But also, towards the end of the campaign, Labour descended into this as well, with the remarks made by Keir Starmer and later, even stronger, by John Ashworth attacking the Bengali community, but you could translate that into attacking any community. And that had a huge impact on people, certainly in my area.
I'm glad you mentioned that. And I know we don't want to only talk about Labour, but I did have one other question, because obviously you were in the Parliamentary Labour Party when Blair and New Labour won in 97. And you've already touched on one thing, which is that there isn't the kind of groundswell of support for this Labour Party, despite the huge majority. What do you think it is about Keir Starmer's Labour Party that meant, Blair and Brown and others were, I don't know exactly what their relationship was with the campaign group, but they were more comfortable with a diversity of left perspectives in Labour? And why do you think there was this hostility towards you and people on the left?
I had plenty of disagreements with Blair and Brown, with Blair principally over Iraq and foreign policy and his later predilection towards ID cards and anti-terror legislation and so on. But I did recognise that both he and Brown did introduce the national minimum wage, which was a big step forward, did introduce Sure Start, did introduce the Human Rights Act and the Freedom of Information Act. All of them maybe could have been better, could have been stronger, but I didn't feel, certainly in 97, there was this complete rejection of the left in the Labour Party that there is at the present time. It later became authoritarian and unpleasant, particularly to some extent after Afghanistan in 2001, but to a huge extent after Iraq in 2003. Now, I think the closing down of internal party democracy and the sort of authoritarian view to dissent in the Labour Party with frequent suspensions and expulsions is something that really puts me off. This leadership, remember, demanded that all Labour MPs take their names off a statement, which was a very mild statement, trying to avert war in Ukraine some years ago. They have shown themselves to be very authoritarian in their running of constituency parties and over the selection of candidates. And for example, in my own constituency, the constituency party had been requesting the right to start a process for selection for at least the last 2 years, never even had the courtesy of a reply to an email from David Evans or anybody else on the subject. And then announced there was going to be a process, announced there was going to be a short list of 3, which suddenly became a short list of 2, which suddenly became a short list of 1. And so the person who stood as the Labour candidate in Islington North this time was nominated by nobody locally, wanted by nobody locally, and voted for by nobody locally. He was just imposed as the candidate. Keir Starmer stood for leadership on the basis that he would empower constituency parties to have full selection processes. That never happened. I think there are issues about party management and democracy which makes me worried about an incoming government, because if you manage your own party in an authoritarian way, what are you going to do in government when, for example, issues of protest turn up over Gaza, over police behaviour and that sort of thing? It seems to me that tradition of right to protest, right to dissent is something that is deeply under threat by the entire political establishment. And that is very, very worrying.
Do you still think that Labour is a force for progressive change? And if you were joining a political party now, let's say you were 23, 24, would you join a Labour Party?
On the second question, no, I wouldn't, because I'd be put off by the authoritarianism within the party. I joined the Labour Party when I was a young man in the 1960s, even though I already disagreed with Wilson on his political support for the Americans in Vietnam. But I felt at home in the Labour Party. I felt I could express my view, and I felt I could campaign within it. And I later was one of the founding members of the Campaign for Labour Party Democracy. So there was a place there and a purpose and so on. What's the future? Well, interesting question. The young people that I spoke to a great deal during this election campaign and were very supportive of our campaign were absolutely not attracted to Labour. They didn't feel that it met their needs. This is a generation that's living in overcrowded council accommodation or very expensive private rented, or even people in their 40s living with their parents. They don't feel that the offer from Labour on two-child benefit cap, on housing or university education actually meets their aspirations. And so I think a new kind of politics emerging. I wrote an article about this for your former paper about community-based political campaigning, and that's exactly what we're starting to do here with, first of all, the election campaign we just run, but secondly, establishing community forums, which we're beginning in September, which I hope will happen in other places. Well, indeed, they already are happening in other places. I want this to develop into a much wider, slightly more focused political movement. But I don't think the idea of a top-down creation of a new political party is something people are demanding. What they want is a voice and their public representatives to be accountable. MPs don't change the world. Governments don't change the world. People change the world by putting pressure and influence on those in office.
My brother was a big fan of you and joined the Labour Party when you became leader. There were a lot of people who were inspired by your message, some of them in the Labour Party, some of them joined the Labour Party. And for people in Islington, it was very clear what they could do to support you and the movement in the election. But what if you don't live in Islington or a seat with a strong left-wing parliamentary candidate, now MP? Like, what would your message be to people who, as you said, don't feel inspired by the Labour Party, but do want to make positive change?
What I would urge them to do is be active on politics, on housing, on wages, on benefit levels as a way of expressing themselves. Does this lead into a political party? Maybe it becomes a strong movement. My ideas behind all this actually come from watching the development over many years of the Workers' Party, PT, of Brazil, which grew up very much from a community-based pressure group organising people in food and housing and work demands, which eventually morphed into a coherent political force. So for people in the election, what I did find was an awful lot of people turned up in Islington North to campaign. Some just came for a day. They travelled long distances, but said they wanted to be part of it. And they felt at last they could do something useful in this election campaign. We got more helpers than I can ever remember in any parliamentary election campaign, which meant that we managed to actually speak to 51% of the electorate by the end of the campaign, which you think of the number of people that are out whenever you call to see them and all that, or places you simply can't get into because of complicated security arrangements. I thought that was a huge achievement. Some people are very critical of me for not jumping ship totally 3 years ago, forming a new party and leading it. So I didn't want to do that because there are many good people in the Labour Party. There are MP comrades that I work happily with, Zara Sultana, Afsana Begum, and so on. I work very closely with them. And indeed, I talk to them almost every day. I think there's going to be a big moment over the two-child benefit cap unless the government has changed its mind again overnight. And it reminds me of Blair in 97 when they had that proposal to reduce the lone parent benefit level, and that led to an enormous rebellion. Interestingly, despite the words that Mandelson and Alistair Campbell put out at that time saying we're not going to tolerate any rebellion, we're not going to tolerate any dissent, Nick Brown as the chief whip at that time, came into the division lobby where we were voting against the lone child benefit. I saw him in there and he was chief whip. And I said, Nick, are you sure you should be in this? Because you're meant to be supporting the government. And he said, I'm just here to tell you that tomorrow there will be a Labour Party, and tomorrow you will be in that Labour Party, and tomorrow, as today and every other day, you have a place in that party. That was a very interesting and quite significant message from the government chief whip at that time. I don't think the same kind of thing is going to apply to those Labour MPs that dissent over the two-child benefit cap. I mean, look at it. It's a no-brainer. It's obvious, isn't it? Every child should be treated equally. Isn't it obvious that if you're in a large family or a small family, you deserve to get support if you're entitled to it? It's not complicated.
So, Jeremy, you've had this wild ride, right? You stand in 2015 to make sure that the argument is put about austerity, but you don't imagine when you are going to do it, when you do it, that you're actually going to win that argument. You become the leader of a party, the parliamentary wing of which proves incredibly resistant to your victory. You go through quite significant accusations around anti-Semitism. You increase the vote share in 2017 and the number, then electorally get hammered in 2019, then get effectively expelled from the party in a way, not formally expelled, but suspended. You can't stand again. Stand against the party that you've been a member of for ages and win. I'm just wondering if there are 2 or 3 lessons that you have learned from that roller coaster ride. Things that you would have done differently, ways in which you understand things now that you maybe didn't before.
I stood in 2015, as you remember, with enormous difficulty and even getting the nominations to be a candidate. We needed 35 MPs to nominate, and we eventually got 36, but that was less than a minute before the close of nominations. So it was a very, very close run thing. And probably half of those that nominated me did so because of pressure from their own constituency Labour parties, or because they felt that at the very least the political platform that I was outlining, essentially the anti-austerity one, deserved to get a message and deserved to get a hearing. I don't think any of them really thought I was going to win.
Nor did you, right?
Exactly. I was about to say that. Neither did I. To begin with, I thought we would be lucky to sort of get a hearing and we'd be able to take part in these debates, and that would help to build the left in the party. And then after a very short time, it became pretty obvious to me that there was massive support. I attended the anti-austerity rally shortly after I'd been nominated, and I remember Mark Zawaka standing on stage saying, you can get this man elected if you sign up to be a Labour supporter and vote in the leadership elections, and then stood up and explained how.
I remember sitting with someone who now works for Keir Starmer saying, I'm really confused. The CLPs we thought would go for Miliband are going for Corbyn on first pref. So there was something that was, you tapped into something that was there with existing members.
Fair point, because it's often said to me, people say quite an accusing way, you only won because you've got all these non-members to vote for you. So it's actually, that's not correct. Look at the figures. Yes, they were voted largely for me, but we would have won anyway, albeit by a small majority. Anyway, that campaign grew very, very rapidly, and with it, huge demands, and we developed policy and put out a lot of policy statements. After I was elected in September 2015, I remember that night writing in my diary, or no, 2 days later, saying, I feel a bit like a beach whale. I've been washed up on a beach, having had a great swim. The problem is all my friends and supporters are still out in the ocean. And in between, we've got a huge hostile force known as the Parliamentary Labour Party. So they were a problem from day one, in that the shadow cabinet can only be appointed from within the Parliamentary Labour Party, both Lords and Commons Parliamentary Labour Party. I didn't know much support there. And I remember the first Prime Minister's question time I went to, I looked around, the chamber was absolutely ram-packed. Every seat for MPs was taken, and every seat in the gallery was taken as well. I don't know about the political makeup of the people in the gallery, but I do know the political makeup of the people in the chamber. And I looked around, and as I'm waiting for it to start, counted 18 people who supported me out of 650. So it felt a bit lonely. And then we had a whole lot of problems, including big attempt at early removal of me in December 15. Then we had the coup in the summer of 16. And then we had the second leadership contest, which we won by an even larger majority than the first one. And I remember saying to the Parliamentary Labour Party, get over it. The party members have voted and they've set the direction in which this party should go. Are you going to set yourselves at war with the party? Well, they did. They set themselves at war with the party. We then went into the 2017 election with Labour support at, from memory, 24%. Actually, the same as Sunak went into this election campaign on. I went into my office that day and we heard the election was announced. It was a bit of a surprise to everybody, whatever hindsight they tell you. And I said, okay, everybody in the office, whole team, every single person, whatever their job, had to come. And I said, I want everybody in there. We have a very quick, very short meeting. And I said, it's like this. The election's been called. Everybody knows it's going to be hard and it's going to be difficult. We're not apologising. We're not retreating. We're not giving in. We're going out now to campaign like we've never campaigned before all over the country. We're doing this because we want to live in a different society and a better world. And that resonated. And we got very, very close to winning in 2017. Indeed, the vote we got was the highest this century for the Labour Party, but the electoral system, if you like, didn't help us very much in that respect. I wanted community organising from the very beginning, and I felt that it would be possible to work with the existing structure and officials within the party, explain what I wanted to do, and that they would work with me on it. I did not and do not believe in dictatorial leadership. Many people say that was a fundamental mistake on my part, but I wanted to build a legacy of democracy and participation. The membership went up to 500,000, and ultimately, just by 2019, was almost 600,000, largest party in Europe. But there was huge opposition to the concept of community organising, not because they particularly disliked the individuals that had been recruited to do the community organising. They didn't like the direction of travel in which I was setting the party as a PT equivalent, if you like, as a community organised base. And we wasted far too much time arguing with people in the party about that. And that, I regret that, because I think we, in many ways, too nice to people.
So you think you should have been more dictatorial than you were?
Or more nasty?
Maybe I should have been, but I wanted to bring people with me. And I also recognised that those that had supported me in the two leadership elections and brilliantly in the 2017 general election were actually politically quite diverse. They believe generally in equality, generally in peace, generally in a better society. Many would have an aspiration of a sort of, at its best, Swedish-style social democracy. Others would be much more to the left on a whole lot of issues. And so, I mean, every political victory, in a sense, is a coalition. I wanted to develop that and develop political education. We didn't really have enough time to do it. But I just remember going to many constituency parties where they were having huge meetings, discussing local issues, bringing people in, doing history on the local labour movement, all those kind of things, and bringing in communities that had never really been represented in the Labour Party before. So I was proud of a lot of what we achieved.
Can I ask, especially, you had a huge amount of criticism levelled at you, some of it rooted in reality, some of it just horrible personal attacks, some of it not rooted in any form of reality at all, like having hats photoshopped on your head. How much of that gets in? Do you have to develop a thicker skin? Like, what was and especially thinking now about this fictitious or probably real young person on the left who wants to get involved in politics, like it didn't look like much fun. Do you just tune everything out? How do you learn what to listen to?
Yeah, the criticism I've had was very public and very severe and very profound from 2015 onwards, but actually wasn't new. I got into a huge amount of hassle the day I was elected to Parliament in 1983 for saying that that Britain should speak to Sinn Féin and to try to bring about an ultimate peace process in Ireland. And I remember the then Chief Whip saying to me, this is 83, if I brought these Sinn Féin MPs, i.e. Gerry Adams, he was the only one then, into Parliament, I would be removed from the Parliamentary Labour Party. And I said, well, I'm bringing them in. And I wasn't removed. So I kind of faced him down on that. But I did get the most incredible attacks on me for my views that there had to be a dialogue with the Republicans in Ireland in order to bring about a peace process, which is actually ultimately what happened. So I was kind of quite used to getting that degree of abuse. Obviously, it was more public and more intense. Do I worry about it? Not really. I lead what I believe to be a balanced life. Others might disagree, but I believe I do, in that I work primarily and always as the centre of my focus for the constituency that's been good enough to elect me. I do advice bureaus, I walk around, I make community groups, I communicate with them and all the things that MPs should do. But my whole process is to try and empower people. Do I worry about it? No, because if you start worrying about it, what people think of you, you never get out of bed in the morning, you never do anything. So you just get on and do what you believe to be right. I also do other things in life. I read a lot, I write a bit, I do other things, and we've recently produced books through the Peace and Justice Project. One is the poetry book and the other one is The Monstrous Anger of Guns, which is an analysis of the arms trade, and promote debate about those. And, well, Gary, you were at one of the poetry book events we did, and it might seem a bit bizarre that Leon McCluskey and I produce a poetry book, but actually it brings a lot of people to have a chat about their ideas, and it's unlocking inspiration and imagination. So I see myself as somebody that's trying to empower and mobilize and motivate others.
Thanks for listening to Over the Top, Under the Radar.
Remember to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
We really rely on support from Patreon. So if you can support the show financially, please go to patreon.com, search for the podcast and make a regular donation.
And you can message us on our socials at over_under_pod_ or email us at info@overunderpod.com.